You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on.
Hello, Gemma here, host of True Crime Conversations, and this is part 3 of an investigation into Australian cancer con artist Belle Gibson, put together by Mamamia's Extraordinary Stories podcast, which we've been dropping over summer for you to enjoy as we take a little break. If you haven't listened to part 1 or 2 yet, we recommend going back and starting there before diving into this final instalment of the series. We'll be back soon with all new True Crime Conversations.
Are you prepared to sign a statutory declaration to say that everything you tell me today is the truth?
Absolutely. There's nothing left to lose, and if that requires a stat deck, then I'm comfortable with that.
I guess why a stat deck is required is because you don't have a good record on telling the truth. Do you?
It's a Sunday night in June 2015. 1 million Australians tune their televisions to Channel 9's Sunday night current affairs staple, 60 Minutes. A wide-eyed, rosy-cheeked young woman appears, seated opposite veteran reporter Tara Brown. Tara looks determined, ready, calm. Tara's subject, Belle Gibson, looks contrite and a little confused, wearing a fluffy pink polo neck with her hair slicked back in a neat high ponytail. It was this image of Belle that was about to become instantly iconic to all of Australia. She had been accused of being a fraud, of tricking the most vulnerable people out of their trust and their cash, and now one of the country's most senior journalists was going to ask her to defend herself. Could she do it? Could she deny the claims she never donated any of the proceeds of her best-selling book to charity as she'd promised? Could she argue that her app, The Whole Pantry, was not built on a lie? Did she ever actually have cancer? These were the core questions Tara Brown and all of Australia wanted answered.
Belle Gibson, again, is confounding. She claimed that she wanted to do the interview to be transparent, to be honest, to apologise, to heal. My belief was that she was coming on to explain, how this had gone so wrong and what had happened. And what I very quickly discovered was that this was somebody who was holding on to an excuse, who wasn't actually prepared to tell the truth.
From Mamamia, welcome to the final episode of Extraordinary Stories, Belle Gibson, the podcast that takes you inside the stories you thought you knew with the women who really do. I'm your host, Emma Gillespie. Belle Gibson had spent years lying about her health. From those early skater chatroom claims that she had died on the operating table during heart surgery, to a terminal brain cancer diagnosis, and finally, revelations that cancer had spread through her entire body. She had built a business out of peddling her strategy for treating that cancer, food that was curing her and could, for a small fee, cure you too. But on the 10th of March 2015, just days after Nick Toscano and Bo Donnelly had started their investigation via the then Fairfax newspapers, Belle told the Australian newspaper that actually she had been misdiagnosed. Belle said that the cancer she had thought she was suffering from all these years, cancer of the liver, uterus, spleen and blood, was just a horrendous mistake. A mistake made by a doctor she wouldn't name.
It's hard to admit that maybe you were wrong. I feel confused, bordering on humiliated.
The claims were bizarre, confusing, and in typical Belle Gibson style, they only served to leave more questions than they answered. It was only a matter of months earlier that Belle was flying high, in Silicon Valley, working on an award-winning app. How did it spiral out of control so quickly? After her charity donations were exposed as, bluntly, a complete lie, no one thought they could trust Belle. She quickly lost the support of Apple and her publishers, Penguin Random House, and gave an interview to the Australian newspaper outing herself for the first time. Throughout the article, Belle stood by her claim that she'd used alternative therapies to survive an aggressive malignant brain tumour for 5 years without any conventional medical treatment. But the investigation by the Australian found a series of contradictory medical claims by the wellness warrior dating back to May 2009. That's when she claimed to have undergone multiple heart surgeries. It was the same year, apparently, that 20-year-old Belle was told by a doctor that she'd be dead within 4 months. But according to the birth date of her own corporate filings, Belle was only 17 at the time, not 20. So now we were left wondering not only if Belle had ever been sick or if she'd donated any of her riches to charity, but also even how old she really was.
How old are you?
I've always been raised as being currently a 26-year-old.
This is a really, really simple question. How old are you?
I believe that I'm 26.
And?
I have two birth certificates and I've had my name changed 4 times. The identity crisis there is big, but that was my normal when I was growing up, Tara. That
What do you know the truth to be now?
That's probably a question that we'll have to keep digging for.
Now, Belle was not only under the scrutiny of the entire country, but its legal system had its eyes on her too.
Look, I think she was part of a movement that has been right across social media. A young woman, wellness, health, like the way she was able to capture that and really get onto that movement early on meant that she became quite a significant figure in a certain sort of online community. You know, she was only 25, 26. You know, she was talking about healthy eating and healthy diet and this inspirational story, seemingly. You know, that was sort of the final cherry on top that people really ate up, I suppose, and thought that this is a fantastic tale and we need to hear more about what she's got to say. And it turns out that it was all lies.
Beyond the financial implications of her deceptions, there were real-world consequences of Belle's behaviour. Cancer survivor and Belle fan Kylie Willie told us how she came very close to ditching her traditional treatment to follow Belle's lead.
I can remember with my husband and the nurse that was looking after me in the haematology ward just saying, I'm done, I'm not doing this anymore, I feel rubbish all the time. I am sick of having the brain fog. I'm sick of feeling nauseous constantly. I've got no hair. I was on horrible steroid treatment, so my face was all puffed up. I just said, I'm done. I'm not having the treatment anymore. And I was lucky that they knew to kind of appease me, I guess. They're like, all right, we'll just get through this last protocol, see how you feel after that. Thank goodness, because there is no doubt in my mind that I wouldn't have made it through if I had have stopped the treatment. I was so far gone with the cancer by the time it was picked up that, yeah, there would have been no return, I guess, if I had have not had the support and, you know, people around me that were able to be sensible and kind all at the same time.
By May 2015, the world knew Belle Gibson had lied. And the first form of any real honesty came from Belle's interview with Claire Weaver at the Women's Weekly.
None of it's true. It's just very scary, to be honest, because you start to doubt the crux of things that make up who you are. You know, I'm blonde and I'm tall and I've got hazel eyes and I've got cancer. And all of a sudden you take away some of those high-level things and it's really daunting. I don't want forgiveness. I just think speaking out was the responsible thing to do. Above anything, I would like people to say, okay, she's human. She's obviously had a big life. She's respectfully come to the table and said what she's needed to say. And now it's time for her to grow and heal.
But even so, Belle continued to maintain she'd been tricked into believing she had cancer, rather than admitting she was perfectly healthy. The Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre in Melbourne, where Belle claims she was diagnosed with brain cancer by a Dr. Mark Johns, they have no record of a doctor with that name having ever worked with them. As far as we can tell, Mark Johns doesn't exist.
He had come to my home and went through a series of tests, and this was dubbed integrative medicine.
So he comes to your home and he does some tests on you?
He does.
What sort of tests?
It was a box, a machine with lights on the front, and that machine was apparently German technology. There's two metal pads, one that goes below the chair and one that goes behind your back, and then that measures what I believe or remember to be frequencies.
And what were the results?
He said to me that I had a stage 4 brain tumour and that I had approximately 4 months to live.
As Tara Brown says, Belle said she wanted to give the interview to 60 Minutes and a companion piece in the Australian Women's Weekly to clear up confusion. But as any of the some 5 million people who have watched that interview then and since would tell you, that's not really what happened.
Belle was quite girly and very sweet and light, a very attractive young woman who seemed to be a bit nervous but very prepared to do an interview, was very friendly to everyone. Once the interview started, she became quite emotional easily. She got angry at some points. She got defiant. Yes, she was quite emotional, and she would often sort of seek understanding that she had been given a hard time in life, and that was part of the reason for what she was saying.
The exclusive didn't come cheap for the Nine Network, who shelled out $75,000 to Belle in order to secure the interview. Journalist Tara Brown was tasked with the responsibility of taking Belle on that day. The veteran reporter says it was an opportunity for Belle to win back some trust from the Australian people. We wanted an explanation, but could Belle give one?
I'm not actually surprised that she came on 60 Minutes. I'm surprised that she continued the lies. She continued with her story that she had believed that she had cancer, that she had a brain tumour, and that she had various cancers throughout her body. And she accepted that she didn't have it, but she maintained that she had been told that she did, and she had believed it for a very long time.
Tara Brown has interviewed politicians, grieving parents, movie stars and murderers. Belle Gibson, she says, was not an easy subject.
Belle Gibson was a difficult interview because she'd take you down a rabbit hole for every answer. So she answers with a great amount of detail and a great amount of certainty. So half the time you're guessing that she's making it up, and half the time you're hoping it's the truth. And it's a really difficult one to assess on the move, if you like, in the moment. I just sort of had all her claims in front of me, and I hope I came to it with some rational thought, and what she was saying just didn't make sense.
Belle ducked and weaved through the entire interview.
I believed he was a real doctor.
So did you lie to be believed, is the question?
I didn't see him in his doctor's office in Perth.
You didn't see him in his doctor's office ever because he doesn't have an office, does he?
No.
Right. You claimed also in your book that you underwent chemotherapy and radiotherapy for 2 months. True or false?
At the time...
True or false?
True, because at the time I believed I was having radiotherapy.
So, false.
Tara told us by the end of it, Belle wasn't thrilled.
We'd stopped filming, so yeah, she was pretty angry and quite upset and, you know, seeking the support of the producers and the team, and then she was gone. However you judge that interview, my ambition was never to humiliate Belle Gibson, and nor do I have any great desire to upset people. It was just really that there was some really obvious questions to be asked of her. She, you know, without sounding high and mighty about it, it's not that she owed me anything, but she owed her audience, I think, an explanation of why she hadn't followed through on the money she claimed she'd sent to charity, you know, why she'd misrepresented her health, why she had done that for years and years and years. So it was uncomfortable, but it was necessary.
Viewers were left with the certain knowledge that Belle Gibson had lied. But no satisfactory confessions or answers came to light. But the law was about to step in. Within a year, the con woman was facing legal action after furious former supporters and customers of Belle and the whole pantry continued to apply pressure.
a body in Victoria that deals with consumer affairs made a complaint to the federal court. And essentially what that body said was what Ms. Gibson and also the company that at the time was called Belle Gibson Pty Limited, but later changed its name, what both Ms. Gibson and that company are doing is misleading and deceptive. And so what the consumer body down in Victoria was doing, firstly, is behaving, I say with respect, in an appropriate way and doing what I would have predicted they would do, which is firstly try to examine Ms. Gibson, and the director has the power to do that. They issue a document that required Ms. Gibson for examination to come answer some questions, and Ms. Gibson behaved in a way that you and I might have expected her to behave, which was not to comply with that notice. And the director then went ahead to the federal court and sought some orders.
That's James Dapperchi, a Sydney-based lawyer. His podcast, Coffee and a Case Note, dives into legal cases and breaks them down into nuts and bolts that are easy enough to comprehend over a coffee and a chat. So we asked him to take a look at Belle Gibson. And James says Belle's story is unlike anything he's ever seen. Victoria's Consumer Affairs Minister Jane Garrett told the ABC at the time that the watchdog would take civil action in the federal court against Ms. Gibson and her now defunct company.
All of those claims made by her round when she suffered the illness, her therapies in respect of that illness, and what she did with her own alternative remedies are false and misleading and deceptive. We will be seeking financial penalties, also in terms of injunctions, to ensure that that conduct is not undertaken again.
But Belle wasn't the only party in the firing line. After all, she'd been backed by Apple and Penguin Random House. Was there a responsibility for these companies to do their due diligence? To ensure Belle was telling the truth? Tara Brown thinks there are more questions for them to answer.
If the reporting is true, they were both contacted and advised, and I think this was done in anonymous fashion, so you have to take it as you like it, I guess, but the stories were not true. And if the reportage is true, then that was ignored and the path was set and continued upon. So I think the question has to be asked, what sort of investigations did they do? What follow-up did they have in terms of Belle, or if they were just so excited by the business prospects of what she was offering?
The evidence against Penguin Random House was pretty damning. Video emerged in September 2016 that revealed the publishing giant may have known more than it was willing to let on. Some say the footage proves Penguin had major concerns about conwoman Belle Gibson's survival story before releasing her book, a book that promoted dumping conventional medicine to beat cancer. The video from 2014 shows Penguin staff interviewing Belle as a sort of rehearsal ahead of her book release.
Belle, can I ask, since your recent cancer diagnosis, have you changed your treatment at all in terms of whether that be conventional or not?
Yeah, I have. I don't know how I want to talk about this because I've not talked about it publicly. Following like a German medicine protocol, because they're like, where are these results coming from? And I know. But it's, just a medicine which is respected throughout Europe but not here in Australia yet.
And how do you take it? What is it exactly?
I don't know how I'm going to talk about this. I might have to do some more reading on it. But it's a machine which is like an electronic pulse, pushes into the cells, and I take medicine when that machine's operating on a program. The computer and machine that I'm on runs this program based on my biology and the way that my body operates through my sleep and times of the day. I take medicine and this program's opening my cells so the medicine can get into them.
And if we don't know about it a lot here, were you doing that in the US or can you get that treatment here?
You can get it in the US and you can get it in Europe. You can't get it here. I'm just lucky.
Doing it here.
Yeah, I'm underground.
So is that why you would hesitate to talk about it, because it's not a practice that's...
Yeah.
I think that you really need to get your story straight about the charities.
Yeah.
I think they're going to go there with that.
They can go there.
Yeah.
And it's a nice part to the story as
Exactly.
well.
It's beautiful. It's just like through Cambodia and Indonesia. Not all of them speak English, so it's more about maybe getting them to send pictures or...
In May 2016, Penguin was ordered to pay a $30,000 fine. The regulatory body that made the ruling says Penguin engaged in misleading and deceptive conduct and made false and misleading representations in breach of the Australian consumer law by publishing the whole pantry. Penguin stopped printing the whole pantry recipe book after Belle's admission in 2015 that she did not have cancer. They've also since made a commitment to not publish any claims or statements about a person's medical condition without them being substantiated in writing by a medical practitioner. As far as legal proceedings against Belle, Tom Cowie was there to see the whole thing. He's a court reporter with the Age newspaper in Melbourne.
Belle Gibson was eventually fined by Consumer Affairs Victoria $410,000. To get to that point, it went through several hearings in the federal court. Belle Gibson didn't turn up to any of those, and so she was eventually fined in absentia, I suppose, in 2017.
So she wasn't there to see it, but $410,000 is a lot of money. But what did the fine mean? Was Belle a criminal? James Dapperchi says Belle wasn't charged per se.
It's not a criminal matter like you or I might go to jail for murder or something like that. It's what's called a civil penalty. So it's a penalty under a piece of legislation called the Australian Consumer Law. And basically, this Victorian consumer body has the power to come to the court and say, this person has been misleading and deceptive, and so this person should pay these fines.
But then Belle did what you might imagine Belle would do. She disappeared. She didn't pay the fine. And by 2019, after 2 years of waiting for their cheque, the courts were fed up.
Then in 2019, the Consumer Affairs Victoria called her to court again to basically explain her finances as part of their way to recoup this fine. And she turned up. It was a bit of a surprise.
This time, Belle came to court, ready for her close-up. In the now iconic images from outside the Melbourne court, Belle dressed all in black, with large sunglasses hiding her face. The journalists who'd been working on her story for years by now were excited to see their subject get her day in court. Tom Cowie was one of them. When
the person isn't there to explain themselves, you don't get an insight into their motivation, you don't get an insight into their emotional state even. A lot of the coverage of court cases has to do with the people involved, and that's usually the accused. And so when you're in a hearing, in a court hearing, you spend a lot of your time focusing on their mannerisms, what their body language is like, whether they're appearing to be offhand or whether they're appearing to be very emotional about what they're saying. So you really do watch them. And when she wasn't there, we didn't know any of that. We couldn't see what her state of mind was like. And so we had to guess. And I suppose the way we guessed was, well, she doesn't care about this fine. She doesn't care about this huge $410,000 fine that she's supposed to pay.
And why did she finally decide to give her detractors the satisfaction of turning up?
I think she finally realised that this wasn't going away and that she had to turn up at some point. Otherwise, she was going to have this fine over her head for the rest of her life. And if she was able to explain that she really didn't have any money, then she might be able to somehow get it reduced or find a way to get out of it, I suppose, and not be declared bankrupt or something like that, which would then affect anything else she was trying to do for the rest of her life. So I think potentially someone has finally said to her, look, you should turn up to court and explain yourself, and this might be a way that you can then lessen the penalty.
And Belle did explain herself. She explained why she hadn't paid off her $400,000 fine and why she wouldn't be paying it. It was a familiar tale. In November 2017, with a young son to raise, Belle wrote to Victoria's Department of Justice, essentially asking for a get-out-of-jail-free card.
I am not working. I'm indebted to BMW Finance, resulting from a personal guarantee of in excess of $50,000. I have a full-drawn credit card with ANZ owing $30,000 and another personal debt exceeding $90,000, all of which I cannot pay. Consequently, I'm not able to pay the amounts ordered by Justice Mortimer. Given my current health, as advised to the court, I would ask that you speak with Hamish directly should you require further assistance.
So by 2019, Belle Gibson says she's still broke, unemployed, and drowning in debt. She's nowhere close to paying off her fine. In fact, she hasn't paid a cent, and she had to explain why.
She really didn't have anything to fall back on. It was just her and the judge, and essentially she had to stop lying. You cannot lie in a courtroom because that is then perjury. So she has to be honest and upfront, and rather than lying, she was probably more evasive. So she didn't outright say something that was false, but she would not answer questions completely, or she would say, I don't recall that, or I don't know how that happened. And so a lot of this hearing that I was at was about her finances and whether she really was penniless and whether she really couldn't afford to pay this fine, which is what she claimed. And so the Consumer Affairs Victoria lawyers were going through her finances forensically. They were reading through everything that she'd spent money on and saying, can you explain this? Can you explain that? Anything that looked a bit unusual for someone who says they don't have any money. So things like holidays to East Africa and cryptocurrency investments, sports bet accounts, what she was spending on clothes. Lawyers were even asking her how much the clothes that she was wearing had cost. Things like that. They were really asking these very, I suppose, personal questions. Anyone who gets asked about their finances, it's something that we often keep private. So she had to answer, and sometimes she couldn't, and it seemed unbelievable to a few of us in the courtroom, the journalists, that she couldn't remember how she paid for her child's school fees or how she paid for certain holidays or things like that. But that's what she claimed at the time.
Belle was quizzed about one of her trips overseas to Bali in 2017 when $1,600 magically appeared in her bank account. She said she didn't know who made the deposit. But as psychologist Dr. Mark Feldman, an expert in Munchausen disorder and medical deception, says, putting Belle on the stand didn't guarantee any honesty.
I think Belle, and I'm guessing because I've never spoken to her, but I think she does not care terribly what other people think. If she did, she'd be more straightforward during her court hearings. She would have been more straightforward when she was selling her book, The Whole Pantry, and developing the app for that. So much of this had to have been premeditated and thoroughly thought through that I don't think she experiences any guilt to add to all of that.
Whether or not she feels guilt for the scale of her deception is one thing, but not paying back her fine? It means Belle is in contempt of court. As her debt rises, many have called for jail time, including former fan and cancer survivor Kylie Willie.
I think a big message needs to be sent with her, particularly because she has had such interest in the media, that if the laws don't change and make people accountable for this sort of thing, it'll continue to happen, that they think that they can get away with it. Because really, okay, so she's had a massive fall from grace, but nothing else has really happened. I don't think she cares morally. She hasn't come out and apologised for what she's done, so there's no real conscience there. Throw her in jail, send a big message, show that this is not okay. You can't prey on people's good nature who donate to somebody that was unwell and raise money for these causes, and it all be a lie, all be just for yourself. She must have known what she was doing. She wasn't stupid. She wrote a book. She managed to get herself aligned with Penguin. She managed to get herself aligned with Apple. She wasn't dumb.
But lawyer James Dapperchi has explained why the chances of Belle landing in a jail cell are pretty slim.
At law school, we're always taught that. Do not be in contempt of a court order. You can go to jail. It almost literally never happens, but you can indeed be imprisoned. The other things that can happen if you are in breach of an order to pay money is that the sheriff gets involved. And as some people listening will be aware, the sheriff's gone and attended Ms. Gibson's properties various times to come out and try to seize some of her property, sell it, and apply that money against the fine. Another relevant thing that can happen if you owe someone a lot of money and you're not going to pay it is if you're a corporation, you can get wound up. Now, Belle Gibson Pty Limited changed its name and is now being wound up, so that issue sort of falls away. That's already happening. But Ms. Gibson herself as a natural person can be made bankrupt. And what bankrupt means is that you don't have enough money to pay your debts as and when they fall due, and someone else gets appointed to sort of take over your financial life, bring in your assets and pay out all the people who you owe money to. I can only speculate as to why that hasn't happened, but it appears not to have happened. Ms. Gibson continues to be not imprisoned and continues to be not bankrupt, to the best of my knowledge and research.
The Belle Gibson circus continued to captivate us all. From last-minute trips overseas to unexplained income, the now infamous fraudster had left everyone wondering, what on earth was she up to now? By January 2020, the police got sick of wondering.
Cancer con woman Belle Gibson has had her home in Melbourne raided in a bid to recoup more than $500,000 of outstanding fines.
The Northcote home of cancer fraud Belle Gibson has been raided. Gibson made a fortune from apps and cookbooks, falsely claiming she cured herself of brain cancer. She was fined $410,000 in 2017, a figure which is blown out with interest and other penalties. Consumer Affairs Victoria says it will pursue Gibson until the debt is paid.
But as the police descended on her home, Belle Gibson had already reinvented herself. Again. That same month, Belle spoke to reporters. Not at court, not outside her raided house, but at a small community fundraising event for Victoria's Oromo community, a group of migrants from Ethiopia in East Africa. This version of Belle was wearing a headscarf, had converted to Islam, spoke some words of the Afan Oromo language and told reporters her name was Sabontu.
Makanke Sabontu. My heart is deeply embedded in the Oromo people. I feel blessed to be adopted by you. I think all of us were positive and hopeful for change. After hundreds of years of oppression against Oromos, this was a gift that was a blessing that was given to me, both by your people, but also a blessing from our Lord, from Rabbi, from Allah.
Belle told Shabo Media she'd been involved in the Oromo community for 4 years, starting out initially as a volunteer. Photographs published by news sites showed her volunteering at an Ethiopian food truck and wearing a traditional beaded headdress. But the Australian Oromo Community Association president Turekigan Chimdi told the Australian newspaper the group hadn't been aware of this woman. He said, "She used to come to our meetings regularly and we loved how she showed interest in our people, but the community has pulled out from her after discovering her story. It's weird. We interview different people at our events and we thought she was just an Australian girl hanging around. We didn't pick her for the video because she was somebody." Tara Brown thinks people are programmed to want to believe the best of people like Belle.
I think what made Belle believable was human kindness. I think that if somebody claims they're dying, you can't imagine that they're making that up. So therefore, she was trading people's sympathy, in my opinion. And that's why she was accepted so easily, I think.
And Tom Cowie? He thinks we'll see another couple of versions of Belle Gibson yet.
I think that she's probably going to be around for a while. I don't know how much publicity she'll seek in the near future, but she's someone who people pay attention to, and as soon as she does try to do something, people will definitely shine a spotlight on and have lots of questions about. So I definitely think she'll be around for a while.
Tara Brown agrees.
I just can't imagine that we won't see Belle Gibson in some other reincarnation. We've already seen that with her adoption of the African nation, Ethiopia. So I don't know what will happen next. But if you're following the history of this young woman to date, then it seems likely that we will see her in another guise at some point. I mean, I really wish she could, find the truth and lead a happy life, a lot less complicated life, but that's up to her.
And as for Kylie, she's better than ever.
Yeah, no, I'm completely fine. The doctors at Alfred were amazing. They were able to get me into remission fairly quickly by doing the chemo, the horrible, nasty chemo. And, since being in remission, I've had no problems whatsoever, no sign of cancer. It's only ever when something like this kind of pops up that I'm like, oh yeah, I had cancer, because it's such a distant memory now, because it just was a blip in my life, a shitty one, but a blip, and now just, all good.
This episode of Extraordinary Stories was written and produced by me, Emma Gillespie, and Holly Wainwright. Audio production is by Madeline Joannou. The executive producers of Extraordinary Stories are Eliza Ratliff and Holly Wainwright. We'll see you next time.